This is the London Ear on RTE 2XM. My name's Nessy, and today here on the London Ear, well, it's actually the last time that the London Ear will be broadcast on DAB in Ireland, as 2XM are leaving the DAB platform. But don't forget, you can still listen to the show all the time, every Saturday. You can still listen to 2XM at 2xm.rte.ie, 2xm.rte.ie. And I thought it was only right and fitting that I actually spoke to I suppose when I moved to London, before I moved to London, I was doing a radio show for this, basically the London Ear, under another name before I moved over here to London, and it was called Culture Cafe. And one of the last people I actually spoke to for Culture Cafe while I was living in Dublin was our next guest on the show. And I'm delighted that it was actually this gentleman as well who gave, yes, the London Ear is a good name for a radio show. So thank you so much for joining us, David Turpin. How are you?
Well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I thought it was only right because there's a couple of people who we've had a few times on the show, and I'm really delighted that you're one of them. The other person we could have had on today's show was Video Blue, who has a new body of work about the diving bell and the butterfly. So we might get him in the next couple of weeks as well. But you are a very, very interesting character. We've had you on a few times, as I said, talking about your music, also talking about your film work. And I thought it was important to talk to you today because over the past year or so, it's easy for radio shows like mine to concentrate on new music because a lot of musicians have been sitting at home making music because none of us could go out. So they've been sitting at their computers, doing their thing, creating music, and there's been some fantastic music that's come out in the past year. But as a creative person, making music is only one side of what you do. You also are a screenwriter. That's your job. And like cinemas have been closed for the past year. There's been lots and lots of different, struggles really for the film industry as well. But not only do we want to talk about that, I want to talk about the Winter Lake, which I have a little circle in the diary to watch this weekend. So I want to talk to you about that because that was supposed to be released just as lockdown was happening in the cinemas. And, that must have been a little bit of a, oh man, it's always nice to see your name up in lights and see it on the big screen.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think we didn't have a release date set when lockdown came in. Obviously we had anticipated a cinema release. And we ended up premiering the film. The film was premiered at the Galway Film Festival, which went online this year for the first time. So, it was a very different way of releasing a film. The film itself came out a couple of weeks ago on demand. I think there were some cinema screenings in the US, but in this part of the world, obviously not. I mean, I don't. You have to be philosophical about it, I suppose. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it is fun going to the cinema and seeing your name and seeing the movie that you worked for years on. But also, it's interesting. It's interesting to be to be a test case in quite a strange situation. I don't think film distribution will ever return to what it was before the pandemic. I think it will have changed by the time we emerge from the pandemic. So it's interesting to be on the bleeding edge of that, I guess.
From what you're saying, it seems that film is and probably will go through the same thing that the music industry has gone through. So there was a physical release for a lot of albums, a lot of records, whatever it was. You got your album out, you got your CD out, you got your piece of vinyl out. And then suddenly, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, is it even that? Maybe slightly more now. I'm getting old. MP3s, WAVs came along, and people were using those as a format. And definitely over the past 10 years, that has changed. That would be the primary source of how people get their music. Now, obviously, there's been a resurgence in vinyl, as if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see my exercise bike behind me, and then behind that you'll see a couple of my shelves of vinyl. But yeah, I spent any money that I had basically in the past year on vinyl. But I guess it's the same kind of thing. It's not was it Marshall McLuhan said, it's the message, it's not the medium. So the medium, the art form is still there, and what you're doing and the creativity is still there. It's just the way that it's delivered to people is changing. And that's a big thing.
Yeah. I'm not great on Marshall McLuhan, but I think you know, when the medium changes, the message changes, the nature of films will change as the method by which they are consumed changes. You know, different things play well on streaming to what plays well in the cinema. You know, I can't imagine that. I know Lawrence of Arabia probably doesn't play particularly well on streaming with all the teeny little people, whereas in the cinema that's an experience. So, you know, I think as the technology that people use to consume films changes, the priorities change, the content does change. Exactly how, I don't know. I guess we'll wait and see, and maybe in 10 years we'll be able to give a more conclusive answer about that. But I mean, you know, cinemas will come back. And then a lot of things are happening simultaneously on streaming and cinema at the moment. So I mean, I think there will always be an appetite for the cinema in some capacity. But yeah, I mean, things are going to change, and it's unpredictable, and we'll have to see.
The last thing I did before lockdown happened last year, lockdown here, we actually kind of went into our own lockdown because of my dodgy immune system. We kind of ran away and hid from the world about a week before the rest of the UK did. So that would have been almost like 2 weeks before Ireland did as such. Now, the last film that I went to see, or the last time we left the house basically to go and do anything fun, was to go to the cinema. We always go to the cinema. Myself, my partner always go to the cinema, or used to in the old world, on a Friday evening after work. And you know, that is, I always found that to be I like the experience, because you have to turn off your phone. You know, if you're sitting watching something on the telly, I know I'm terrible for watching a film on the telly and playing Candy Crush or something at the same time. Whereas if you're in the cinema, you have to put your full concentration on something. There's something about the experience of actually going to the cinema and seeing something. And it's a really, really good way. I always found anyway, that it's a really good way to chill out before the weekend. So it's kind of like... it's almost like an air hatch of sorts that you go into following your day's work, and then you come out and you're ready for the weekend. You're nice and chilled. You're after seeing something. It's almost like a press reset kind of moment.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't get that on a telly.
No. The TV has different mysterious and magical powers. I mean, I suppose the thing that interests me about streaming and television is, Well, I think of it as its sinister quality. I mean, a lot of the work that I do in film is to do with things that are quite sinister. And and I suppose it's intriguing the way that the TV is. It's like a little doorway in our home, and we open up that doorway, and we don't know what's going to come through it. It's like, it's almost. There's almost a strange kind of danger to the TV. I mean, I think all of us remember um, being terrified by things on the television when we were children. And what made them terrifying was because they appeared uninvited in our homes. I remember being intensely terrified by Twin Peaks as a very small child. Um, and I think part of what made it so terrifying was the fact that it was already in my home. Um, and I think that streaming and TV can be really interesting when you're in those kind of genres because it's already you come home from the cinema. The last film that I saw before lockdown um, was The Invisible Man. I
That was
didn't,
the very same film I saw.
and I think that film is based on the fun of that film is the idea that he may be following you home from the cinema, and so you close the door and you think, I've left that there, thank heavens. Um, but with TV, you're already past that stage. You're already in your home. You're already looking over your shoulder on the sofa rather than in the street. It's more intense in some strange ways, and we think about the cinema is a much more intense experience because you do have to turn off your phone and you are in this dark room and you can't just get up and leave. And that's true, but I think TV has different intensities as well that are interesting.
And today we're actually talking to David Turpin, but we're talking mainly about his screenwriting and about the film industry and what's been going on over the past while. But we really want to be here and chat about his film, The Winter Lake.
Yeah.
So tell us about The Winter Lake and tell us about, it's been released recently here in the UK, so you can look at it, you can go onto your streaming or, you can buy it online now and look at it that way, which is the way forward for the foreseeable future, how things are probably going to work for most of the film industry and music industry, gigs and whatever else. Tell us about the project itself. How did you get involved? And where do you have an ideas book, or where do all these little gems come from?
Well, I first began on the Winter Lake. I think it must be over 4 years ago. I had written a film called The Lodgers, which came out, I think, in 2017, 2018. And this was the next one after that. And I was working on them concurrently for a while. So, we had begun The Winter Lake before The Lodgers was shot. And I did it with the same producers, which is a company called Tailored Films. The producers are Ruth Tracy and Julianne Ford. And I think I had a conversation with Ruth about seasonal lakes. They're called turlocks here in Ireland. So a lake that's fed by an underground river, and so the lake can rise up or disappear. And I suppose that image got me thinking about, it sounds so silly, but things that appear and disappear, hidden things that are revealed, and all those kind of ideas. And I guess I became interested in the idea of writing a script to do with something that's discovered in a seasonal lake, because I was interested in the idea of that we as human beings try to conceal our crimes, maybe, but nature, even though nature is indifferent to us, nature sometimes intervenes in crimes in an interesting way. I mean, I would never draw a parallel between our film and this case, but obviously the murder of Elaine O'Hara was discovered in Ireland because of because the water level was low in a reservoir, because nature seemed to step in and ensure that this was discovered. So there's something really interesting about that idea. So yeah, I was interested in that.
So I know from talking to you before about the lodgers, I know that sometimes I think the lodgers was slightly different for you because you were also involved with the soundtrack as well. So you were involved like all the way through on that. Um,
Mhm.
how far did your involvement go with this film?
I mean, I think we were working on the script for about a year and a half, and then the director, Phil Sheeran, joined, and then I worked with him for probably another year and a half. Um, I didn't spend any time on the set. I visited the set once, and for some reason, I managed to visit on the day that they were shooting a car crash, which was like, a quarter of a page in the script, but is this incredibly difficult technical thing to film. And then the other thing that I saw was one of the actresses having to sort of run in and out of a pond or something all night for over and over again. And I felt very guilty that I was in some way responsible for this, even though she did it with there was no issue about it, but I still felt, God, this poor woman, in and out of this pond in the middle of the night over and over again, and it's all my fault. Um, um, yeah, I was only there for a couple of days on the set. Films are an interesting thing. In music, you control everything right up to the very end. But a film is shaped by many people. The screenwriter is one of the first, but then it goes on and it has its own journey and becomes its own thing. It's very different that way, and in some ways that can be very liberating.
Looking at the cast of this film, there's some really good young actors in here. Anson Boone is in there, and I think it must have been, was it at the start of lockdown? Maybe it was even before that. Emma Mackey is just an amazing, amazing actor. She's just so talented.
Yeah, I was really excited when she joined. She was the last cast member, I think, to join. So it was that's what sort of brought the film to life, I suppose, when the full cast is in place. Um, and it's a difficult role, that Emma is playing in this film, because it's a very realist film, and Phil's take on the material is very grounded and very real, but at the same time, it's also a film noir, and she's playing one of those characters who holds a great deal back. And you need a very charismatic performer, I think, to keep you engaged as a viewer with a character who doesn't show anything on the surface. So yeah, I was really excited about her.
So Emma was in Sex Education,
Mm-hmm.
which was an absolutely fantastic. It was just brilliant. I loved it. I kind of lapped it up. I couldn't get the time quick enough to watch it, to be quite honest with you. And also in the film is Charlie Murphy, who people might know from Peaky Blinders, I guess, really. And Anson Boone then was in 1917. I think it's really encouraging when you see young actors given the opportunity as well to not just be in a Stranger Things kind of, almost like a club, if that makes sense. A lot of if you look at, I'm currently watching I can't even, How to Get Away with Murder, and there's a lot of really good actors in there, but again, they're all in a club. It's like the Scooby Gang. It's just a Scooby Gang. You get a bunch of actors. It's like the what you call them from the 70s, no, the 80s, the Rob Lowe and Kiefer Sutherland, and all the same kind of thing. But I think it's really good when you can see actors that are, that they're showing their diversity and what they can do. I think that's really encouraging.
I mean, I think, it's, I mean, I don't have a great deal of interest in those kind of clubby, gangy scenarios. I'm interested in people who are individuals. I like writing people who are quite alone in the world. Um, when I think of those kind of, I mean, I always think of those sort of gangs of young people that I just think of Heathers. I think it's a
Yeah.
bad thing. The idea that young people move in packs. Um,
You haven't
I
seen our street out here on a Friday night.
you know I mean I'm interested, I suppose, in the powerlessness that young people feel and how they deal with that and how they try to rise above it or fight against it. And I think as adults, we forget it very quickly, just how powerless you are as a child or and a teenager. Um, one of the things that was really important in the early scripts of The Winter Lake and through into the film is that there are a lot of images of people in cars, um, people being driven, because as young people and young people living in a rural environment, they can't drive. They're dependent upon other people to get them everywhere, and they're at the mercy of other people all the time because they can't get away. And I think we forget that as adults. We forget that feeling of how much you're at the mercy of other people simply because you're young, and that's um, it's an interesting dramatic situation. Everything seems to be heightened when you're writing for young people or when your story involves young people. I remember I read an interesting thing about um, writing for teenagers. It was and the critic observed that the thing that makes teenagers kind of exciting protagonists in films is that everything is urgent for them. Even being bored, even when you're just bored and hanging around, you're doing it with urgency. So I suppose that's one of the reasons that I find teenage characters interesting to write, is that there's always this underlying tension and urgency with them.
And one thing that seems to come across all your work, whether it's film or music, is you have this sort of a gothic undertone to everything you do.
Hmm. I mean, I like,
The mysterious, the dark.
yeah, I do. You know, that's just sort of how I'm wired. Um, it's yeah. I mean, I remember seeing Dolly Parton interviewed a long time ago, and she was asked, because she's such a vivacious person, and yet so many of her songs are so sad, and she was asked about this, and she said, well, I like to write sad songs. I like to sing sad songs. That's just what she likes. um, and I suppose I like things that are mysterious. I like things that are um, yeah, that are might strike some people as dark. Yeah, that's sort of how I see the world. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a negative worldview, but I certainly see the world as a dangerous place, and you know, and I think that comes through in my work. Yeah.
How have things been for you personally in the past year? Like, what have you found out about yourself? Or have you found out anything?
Well, because I'm a writer for a living, a lot of people sort of say to me, "Oh, well, Dave, nothing has changed for you. You're still at home typing," and um, and that's sort of true. But one would hope that one's work is in some degree of conversation with something outside one's room.
Yeah, it's nice to get inspiration from a line somebody says or a conversation that would spark an idea or something.
Yeah, I mean, I am. It's been odd. I mean, it's been an odd time for everyone. I've um, got lots of work done, yeah, but it's difficult, and sometimes when I ask people, what they're, and they kind of go, oh, I've got so much done. Oh, it's so wonderful. It's just been, I've got so, and I think honestly, I don't believe it for a second. I mean, I think everybody has struggled with, with this.
Especially the past couple of months. I mean, it's been winter. We've been stuck indoors. We've had nowhere to go. It's been
Yeah.
really tough for the past couple of months, especially when I know the darkness is just over the past week or two. Well, here it seems like there's, well, within our household anyway, it seems like there's a better, I suppose, better mood because there's longer evenings. And now this weekend, the time is changing. So we'll have an extra hour at night of
Yeah.
just sunlight. And it doesn't feel like you live in a cave.
I quite like living in a cave.
I don't mind caves. I get sunburned at the best of times. So living in a cave doesn't particularly bother me. But I would like to be able to go out and just like head over to Greenwich, get a coffee, and not have to worry about like just sitting down and someone's coughing over me or spluttering over me.
Yeah, well, it won't be too long, I guess, before we can do all those things again. I mean, I've valued the time alone in some ways. I was in the middle of moving house during lockdown, so I actually spent quite a long period of lockdown in the house I grew up in, alone in the house I grew up in, with the ghost of my teenage self. So that was a trip. um, but I can't complain about how it's been.
So what's next for David Turpin? More
Um,
music, more film, more writing?
yes, I'm working on a couple of films, and hopefully things that will be going into production, not this year, but next year. Looking for something wouldn't. Um, yeah, and we'll see. And I'm starting to look at doing some writing for television as well, and I'm starting to look at directing a film.
Oh,
So
wow.
many things.
That's excellent. That is excellent to know. So you wrote The Winter Lake. It was directed by Phil Sheeran and it's currently available on lots of streaming platforms. And it's, I think you can get it through Amazon Prime as well in the UK. If you go in, you get the option to, I think, buy it for 3.50 for a weekend or whatever it is,
Yeah,
which is really affordable. It's, if you go spend a couple of hours watching that, you're supporting the Irish arts as well, which is really important. And yeah, if people want to find out more about you, more about your work, where do they go?
they can look me up on IMDb,
Oh, that's
or
a good one.
yeah,
Yeah.
or I have a website, is thelatedavidturpin.com.
David Turpin, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.